Sarah Miller sat quietly in her dimly lit living room, staring at the photograph that sat on the mantel. It was a picture of her and her son Ethan on a summer day that seemed like it happened a lifetime ago. Ethan, with his bright smile and curious eyes, was now just a memory, one that Sarah could barely hold on to without breaking into pieces. The accident had stolen him from her. One fateful night, one careless mistake, and with it, the laughter, the joy, and the light that had once filled their home. The house felt cold, even in the warmth of summer. Each room was a silent reminder of everything that was lost. The walls, once echoing with Ethan's excitement as he ran from one room to the next, now stood still. His favorite books were still stacked by the window, gathering dust. The model rocket he had painstakingly built with his own hands sat on his desk, untouched, as if waiting for him to return and finish the mission he'd started. Sarah hadn't had the heart to move anything. It was as though if she just held on to these physical pieces of Ethan, maybe she could somehow hold on to him, too. But the truth was, nothing could bring him back. The pain was suffocating, relentless. Every morning felt like a struggle to get out of bed, and every evening as the stars began to twinkle in the dark sky, she found herself waiting for him to come through the door, laughing, shouting about something new he'd learned or something exciting he'd done that day. But that door never opened. In her grief, Sarah had become a prisoner of the past. The present was a blur, and the future seemed too distant to imagine. She couldn't shake the feeling that, despite everything, something was wrong, something beyond her control. The emptiness in the house mirrored the emptiness in her heart, a void she couldn't fill, no matter how hard she tried. She spent her days immersed in memories, desperately seeking a way to bring Ethan back, even though deep down she knew she could never have him back the way she wanted. And then, on one ordinary day that felt no different than the rest, Sarah received a call that would change everything. It was from the K-9 training center where she had once worked, a place she had poured so much of herself into after Ethan's death. They told her about Max, a dog she had helped train, a highly skilled working dog capable of extraordinary things. They said he was ready for a handler, someone who could give him the time and care he deserved. What Sarah didn't know, however, was that Max wasn't just any dog. He was about to become something far more meaningful than just a companion. He would bring with him a connection to Ethan that would change Sarah's life forever. Little did Sarah know, the void in her heart was about to meet the unexpected, and a new chapter was about to begin. The days blurred together for Sarah. After Ethan's death, time seemed to stretch in ways that defied her understanding. The house, once so full of life, had become nothing more than a shell. The moments she had shared with Ethan now felt like fragments of a distant dream, things she could barely grasp. She went through the motions of daily life, but everything felt hollow. There were times when she would hear a sound in the kitchen, like the faint scrape of a chair against the floor, and for a moment she would think Ethan was there. But the sound was just the wind outside, tapping against the window. The world continued, but Sarah was trapped in the past, unable to move forward. It was on one of these long, gray afternoons when the phone rang, breaking the silence in the room. Sarah hesitated, unsure of whether she even wanted to answer. It was a call from the K-9 training center where she had once volunteered, helping to train dogs like Max, highly skilled, highly disciplined dogs who had the ability to protect, search, and even read human emotions in ways most people couldn't comprehend. She picked up the phone, her voice sounding distant, almost mechanical. The woman on the other end of the line, a familiar voice from her time at the center, spoke gently but with an urgency that made Sarah sit up. "Sarah, it's good to hear from you," the woman said. "I hope you're doing okay. I know it's been a while since we last spoke. Listen, we have a dog here, Max. He's exceptional, truly. We've been looking for the right handler and we thought of you." Sarah blinked, her mind sluggishly processing the words. Max? She had heard about him before, a dog known for his sharp instincts and unmatched training. But why was she being asked to take him on? It had been so long since she'd been involved with the center. The idea of taking on a dog, especially one so highly trained, seemed overwhelming. She was still barely holding it together herself. The woman continued, sensing Sarah's hesitation. He's been through it all, Sarah. Search and rescue, protection, you name it. But more than that, Max has this unique sensitivity. He can sense emotions, almost like he understands when someone is in pain or distress. I think he'd be a good fit for you. We know you've got the heart for it. Max just needs someone who can guide him. The words hung in the air, heavy with the implication that Max wasn't just any dog. He was more than just a working animal. He was, in some strange way, an answer to something Sarah didn't even know she was searching for. A part of her, despite the walls of grief she had carefully constructed around herself, felt a strange pull, a spark of curiosity. Maybe Max was the distraction she needed. Maybe having a dog would fill the silence. Maybe, just maybe, he could help her navigate this unbearable loneliness. After a long pause, Sarah finally spoke. I'll take him. When can I come by? The decision was made, almost before she knew it, and as soon as the words left her mouth, a strange weight lifted off her shoulders. She had a task, something to focus on. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was a start. And that's what she needed, something to break the endless cycle of memories and sorrow. The very next day, Sarah drove to the training center. The familiar scent of fresh pine and leather greeted her as she stepped out of the car. Her heart raced, but she pushed the feeling aside. The air felt different today, as though something significant was about to happen. Max was waiting for her. She hadn't expected the dog to make an impression so quickly, but when she first laid eyes on him, something inside her stirred. Max was a large German shepherd with a commanding presence. His fur was a deep, rich tan and black, his muscles sleek and well-defined, a reflection of the rigorous training he had undergone. But it wasn't just his appearance that caught Sarah's attention. There was an intelligence in his eyes, an understanding that seemed to pierce through her, as though he knew exactly who she was and what she was going through. The woman from the center introduced them, her voice soft but full of confidence. This is Max. He's had some incredible training, but more than that, he's been trained to understand people. He'll bond with you quickly, I promise. Sarah knelt down slowly, unsure of what to do next. Max didn't rush toward her, but his gaze never left her face. He seemed to be studying her, just as she was studying him. There was a quiet calm about him, a stillness that made Sarah feel strangely safe. For a moment she forgot about the ache in her chest, the emptiness that had been her constant companion for so long. In that space, just between her and Max, she felt something shift. She reached out cautiously, and as her hand hovered just above his head, Max stepped forward, nuzzling her palm with a gentle force. It was as though he was offering her a silent promise. She wasn't sure what it meant, but in that brief moment, she felt something she hadn't in months, a flicker of hope. It was then that Sarah realized that Max wasn't just a dog. He wasn't just there to fill the silence or to give her something to do. There was something deeper, something more profound at play. He was a bridge between the life she had lost and the life she still had yet to fully embrace. As Sarah stood up, her mind began to race with questions. Could this dog, with his uncanny sensitivity, help her heal? Could he, in some strange way, bring Ethan back to her? The thought seemed impossible, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that Max's arrival was more than coincidence. There was something about him, something that felt like destiny. And as she walked away from the training center with Max by her side, she couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had once believed. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself growing accustomed to Max's presence in her life. At first, she wasn't sure what she had expected, but Max had settled into the quiet routine of the house almost effortlessly. He followed her everywhere, his large, steady form a comforting presence in the corners of her vision. But there was something unusual about him, something that went beyond the simple companionship of a dog. Max wasn't just another animal to care for. He seemed to be attuned to something Sarah couldn't quite explain, as if he could sense the weight of the grief that still clung to her, a grief that had turned her home into a shrine of lost memories. It started subtly. In the mornings, Max would be waiting by the door when Sarah woke, his eyes alert but soft. He would sit at the foot of the stairs, watching her with an intensity that was almost human. Sarah, still lost in the fog of sorrow, would sometimes glance at him absent-mindedly. But then, there were the small moments, the flashes of behavior that she couldn't shake. One morning, as Sarah walked past the room where Ethan had spent countless hours, his old desk still cluttered with science books and drawings of stars and planets, she noticed Max standing motionless by the door. He was staring at something, his nose twitching as if he were sniffing the air, his body tense. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She walked over to him and gently patted his head, but he didn't budge. His gaze remained fixed on the desk, where Ethan's favorite telescope had once sat, still pointed toward the heavens. Max suddenly turned and trotted toward the far corner of the room, where Ethan's model spaceship was perched on the bookshelf. He nudged it gently with his nose, then looked up at Sarah with those piercing, intelligent eyes. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Ethan had spent weeks building that ship, his small hands carefully assembling the pieces, imagining one day he might travel among the stars. And yet, here was Max, acting as if the ship and the very essence of Ethan's presence was still very much alive. Puzzled, Sarah knelt beside him. "What are you trying to tell me, Max?" she whispered, half to herself, but the words felt hollow in the empty room. Max's only response was to sit down beside her, his head resting gently on her lap. It was as if he were waiting for her to understand. The next evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle above, Max's behavior grew even stranger. Sarah sat by the window, staring out at the vast expanse of the night sky, where the stars shone bright, just as they had when Ethan was alive. She had always loved the night sky. It was a passion she and Ethan had shared, those quiet moments when they would sit together, marveling at the constellations, dreaming about space and the endless possibilities of the universe. But now the sky felt empty, like a vast, cold reminder of what she had lost. Max, who had been lying at her feet, suddenly stood up and walked over to the window. He sat by her side, gazing at the stars with an intensity that mirrored her own. Sarah glanced down at him, surprised to see him so still, his posture upright as if he too was studying the stars. It was then that a strange sensation washed over her, an uncanny feeling that she had never experienced before. It was as if Max was somehow connecting her to something beyond the physical world, to the world where Ethan still existed. The realization hit her like a wave, and with it, a feeling she couldn't quite put into words. Max wasn't just a dog. He wasn't merely filling the empty spaces in her house or acting as a distraction from her sorrow. He was more. He was a bridge, one that seemed to connect the living to the departed. He was somehow in tune with the essence of Ethan, something she had never believed possible, yet here she was, experiencing it firsthand. The following day, Sarah took Max outside for a walk. She wasn't sure where they were headed, but she let her feet carry her, as though they were following some invisible pull. As they walked down the familiar path that led to the forest, the very same one where she and Ethan had spent countless hours hiking, laughing, and talking about everything from distant galaxies to the future of humanity, Max's behavior grew more intense. He began pulling her in a specific direction, leading her toward a part of the forest she hadn't ventured to in a long time. Max stopped in front of an old oak tree, its gnarled branches twisted into the sky. He sat down and looked up at her, waiting, as if expecting her to understand. Sarah frowned, confused. She looked around, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then her eyes fell to the ground near Max's paws. There, half buried in the dirt, was a small, crumpled piece of paper. She bent down to pick it up, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The paper was old, yellowed with time, and the handwriting was unmistakable. Ethan's. "Mom," the note began, "I'll always be with you even when you can't see me. Look for me in the stars, in the quiet moments. I'll never leave you." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as the words sank in. She could barely breathe, her heart swelling with a mixture of grief and relief. Ethan had left her a message, a sign that he was still here somehow. And Max had led her to it. In that moment, Sarah understood. Max wasn't just a dog who had wandered into her life. He was part of something far greater, something she hadn't even begun to comprehend. He was the link between the world she had lost and the world she still lived in, a connection that defied logic but felt so real, so powerful, that it left no room for doubt. She knelt beside Max, who gently nuzzled her hand and whispered softly, "Thank you, Max. You've brought him back to me." Weeks passed, and Sarah found herself slowly adjusting to life with Max. The empty, desolate spaces in her home seemed a little less suffocating now that he was there. Max was more than a companion. He had become an unexpected anchor in the sea of grief that had swallowed her whole since Ethan's passing. Yet, despite the growing comfort she felt in his presence, something remained unsaid, something unexplained. There was still a sense of mystery hanging in the air, as if Max was not merely a dog, but a thread woven into a larger, more complex tapestry of fate. One quiet evening, as dusk settled over the landscape, Sarah was sitting by the window, her thoughts drifting to places they always seemed to go, back to Ethan. She had never fully processed her son's death. It still felt like a distant nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The house, though filled with memories, had become a mausoleum of sorts, a place that was both comforting and agonizing. She couldn't rid herself of the thought that Ethan's absence had left a hole in the fabric of her world, one that nothing could fill. Max lay on the floor, his head resting on his paws, always by her side. He was always there, watching, waiting, as if he could feel the emotions Sarah couldn't fully articulate. His steady presence became her solace, yet there was a certain quiet intensity in his eyes that made her wonder whether he knew something she didn't. It was more than his protective instincts, more than his ability to sense when she was sad or anxious. There was something deeper, an almost spiritual connection between them that she couldn't ignore. It was on one of these quiet evenings that the phone rang, breaking the stillness of the room. Sarah hesitated, unsure if she wanted to pick it up. But when she saw the name on the screen, Mason, one of Ethan's closest friends, her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from Mason since the accident, and part of her wasn't sure she was ready for what he might say. Taking a breath, Sarah answered, her voice soft and wary. "Mason?" "Sarah, I don't know how to say this." Mason's voice came through, laced with hesitation. "But I've been thinking about something Ethan said to me a long time ago. I wasn't sure if it meant anything at the time, but now I think you should know." Her pulse quickened, a sense of foreboding creeping over her. "What did Ethan say?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Mason spoke again, his voice shaky. "The last time I saw him, just before the accident, we were talking about the future. I remember him telling me something that didn't make much sense at the time. He said that if anything ever happened to him, there would be someone special, who would look out for you. A friend. A dog. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A dog? Yeah. He said that if he couldn't be there for you, this dog would come and help you, guide you through it all. I didn't really think much of it back then, but now, with everything happening, I can't help but wonder if he meant Max. He was so sure about it, like it was a promise he'd made. The weight of Mason's words hung in the air, filling the space between them. A promise. Ethan had known something. Had known that Sarah would need someone after he was gone. Max was not just any dog. He was the fulfillment of a promise Ethan had made, a promise to protect her, to help her find her way through the darkest days of her life. A chill ran through Sarah as she looked down at Max, who had moved to sit beside her, his gaze steady and unwavering. It was as though he, too, had heard the conversation and was waiting for Sarah to piece everything together. In that moment, it felt as though time slowed, and the realization hit her like a flood. Ethan had known. Ethan had somehow known that this moment would come, that she would need help, that she would need someone to help her carry the weight of grief. And in his final moments, he had made a promise that Max would be there for her, to guide her, to protect her when she needed it most. Max nudged Sarah's hand gently, and she reached down to stroke his fur. It wasn't just the comfort of a dog she felt now. It was a deeper connection, a spiritual link, something beyond the ordinary, beyond what Sarah had ever imagined. Max was more than a protector. He was a messenger, a bridge between the world she had lost and the one she still had to navigate. Ethan's presence wasn't gone, it was just transformed, manifested through the dog who had quietly become her constant companion. The weight of grief that had once seemed insurmountable suddenly didn't feel so crushing. Max, in his own quiet way, had been reminding her that love never truly fades. Ethan's love for her had found a way to transcend death, to reach her even through the silence of the years. And in this revelation, Sarah felt a sense of peace, an acceptance of the truth that she was not as alone as she had believed. She smiled faintly as she looked out the window, the stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt the weight on her heart lighten. She wasn't alone. Ethan had kept his promise. Max was here, and in his presence she could almost hear Ethan's voice. "I'm still with you, Mom, always." Max, ever faithful, rested his head on her lap, and Sarah finally allowed herself to relax into the moment, knowing that the love she had lost had found a way to return. It hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed form, taking the shape of a dog who was more than just a protector. Max was the living embodiment of a promise, a love that could not be extinguished. The peaceful rhythm of Sarah's life with Max had become her new normal, but deep down, a lingering sense of unease gnawed at her. It wasn't just the absence of Ethan that haunted her, it was the feeling that danger might be lurking just beyond her quiet world. She couldn't pinpoint the source of her discomfort, but there was an underlying tension that had begun to crack through the fragile peace she had tried so hard to rebuild. Sarah was always vigilant, aware of the threat that lingered just out of sight, but she hadn't known how real that threat truly was, until it was too late. It all started one evening when Sarah returned from a trip to the grocery store. She pulled into her driveway, noticing that something felt off. The usual stillness of her home, the silence that had grown comfortable, now seemed charged with an unspoken tension. Max was at the door, his head low, his posture alert. He didn't greet her with his usual excitement or wag his tail. Instead, he stood still, eyes scanning the surroundings as though he sensed something she couldn't. Sarah hesitated. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she instinctively checked the darkening yard for any signs of movement. Nothing. But Max's demeanor was enough to make her uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. That night, as the moon cast a pale light over the house, Sarah couldn't sleep. Max lay beside her, his body tense, his eyes fixed on the door. Sarah turned restlessly in bed, unable to quiet the unease that had settled in her chest. The silence of the house felt suffocating, pressing in on her. It was too quiet, too still. Around midnight, she was jolted awake by the sound of something shifting outside. Max sprang to his feet, growling low, his ears flat against his head. Sarah's heart raced, her mind racing with possibilities. She grabbed the flashlight by her bedside and crept toward the window, trying to peer into the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw a shadowy figure moving in the yard, slow, deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. Her first instinct was to call the police, but something told her that wasn't enough. This wasn't some random trespasser. No, this felt far more dangerous. Before she could make a move, Max was at her side, nudging her toward the back door. He wanted her to follow him. There was no time to hesitate. Max's instincts were sharp. He knew there was imminent danger. The bond between them was growing stronger, and in that moment, Sarah trusted him completely. She took a deep breath and followed him outside, her heart hammering in her chest. Max led her through the backyard, weaving between the trees until they reached a small shed at the far corner of the property. The figure from the yard had disappeared, but Sarah's anxiety only grew. Why had they come here? What was their intention? The air was thick with tension, and she could feel the pounding of her heart in her throat. Just as she began to question her decision to follow Max into the darkened woods, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Sarah spun around, her pulse racing. There were two men, shadows in the darkness, walking toward her. They were moving slowly, deliberately. One of them had a glint of metal in his hand, a knife. Sarah's blood ran cold. She realized then that these men weren't here by accident. They had been following her, stalking her for days, perhaps longer. And now, with her alone in the woods, they were closing in for the kill. Before she could react, Max was already on the move. He lunged forward with a force that took the men by surprise, his teeth bared, his body a blur of motion. The men shouted in alarm, but Max was relentless, his training kicking in as he pinned one of them to the ground, his growl a warning to the other. Sarah's shock quickly turned to action. She grabbed her phone from her pocket, dialing 911 as she watched Max take control of the situation. His growls filled the air, and with a swift motion, he knocked the knife from the man's hand, forcing him to retreat. The second man, seeing his partner subdued, turned and fled, disappearing into the woods like a shadow. Max didn't stop until he had chased the threat away, his instincts driving him to ensure Sarah's safety. Once the danger had passed, he returned to her side, his body still tense but his movements steady. He looked up at her with those intelligent eyes as if to say, "It's over now. You're safe." Tears of relief and gratitude welled up in Sarah's eyes as she sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around Max's strong frame. The fear that had gripped her heart began to dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of safety. Max had done more than protect her. He had saved her life. Without him, she might not have made it out of the woods. The connection between them had never felt more real, more vital. When the police arrived shortly after, they combed the property and confirmed what Sarah had feared. The men were part of a larger criminal operation, and they had been watching her for some time. She was not the intended target. Her late husband's involvement in a controversial investigation years ago had apparently made her a person of interest to some dangerous individuals. But Max had been the one to see it before she could, the one to sense the danger long before it arrived. In the weeks since the danger had passed, Sarah had learned to trust again. She had trusted Max to protect her, to guide her, and most importantly, to help her remember that love does not fade with time. It transforms. Ethan's love, his promise, had found a way to live on in this extraordinary creature. Max wasn't just a dog, he was a manifestation of everything Sarah had ever held dear. Her bond with her son, the trust they shared, and the unwavering devotion that no force in this world could destroy. She reflected on the lessons she had learned from the events that had transpired. The importance of resilience, of trusting in the unexpected, and of recognizing the subtle ways love finds a path back to us when we need it most. When Ethan had passed away, Sarah had felt as though she were walking through life in a fog, unable to see a way forward. But Max had shown her that even in the darkest moments, there was a flicker of light, if only she was willing to see it. Through every challenge, every moment of fear, Max had been there, not just as a companion, but as a protector, a bridge between two worlds. He had helped her face the danger that threatened her life, and in doing so, he had given her back the courage to live again. But beyond that, Max had also reminded her of the most important thing. Love never truly dies. It lingers in the memories we hold dear, in the connections we share, and in the little moments that bring us comfort when we need it most. As Sarah looked up at the stars, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She no longer felt alone, not really. Ethan's love had found its way to her, through Max, through the unwavering presence of this remarkable dog who had not only kept a promise, but had taught her that love's strength was eternal. She could almost hear Ethan's voice, soft and reassuring. "I will always be with you, Mom. You're never alone." And she wasn't. She wasn't alone in the quiet moments of grief, nor was she alone in the moments of joy. Love had a way of wrapping itself around us, even when we didn't see it, even when we couldn't feel it. It was in the way Max looked at her with those knowing eyes, in the way he stayed close, his presence a constant reminder that life, no matter how difficult, was worth living. It was in the quiet comfort of knowing that the love she had shared with Ethan, the bond they had forged, had not been broken. It had only evolved, found new meaning, and come back to her in a form she had never expected. Sarah smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek, not of sorrow but of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She was no longer searching for something to fill the empty space that Ethan had left behind. She had found it in the quiet loyalty of a dog who had become her protector, her confidant, and the living embodiment of a love that never fades. As Max nuzzled her hand, Sarah realized that love, in its truest form, was the most enduring force in the world. It didn't matter how much time passed or how much pain they endured. Love had a way of finding its way back, of transforming into something even more powerful and beautiful than before. And in that moment, as she sat under the stars with Max by her side, Sarah understood that the love between her and Ethan would never truly fade. It would live on in the bond she shared with Max, and in the memory of a promise that had been kept, one that would remain unbroken for as long as she lived. The story of Sarah and Max is not only a journey of overcoming the pain of loss, but also a profound testament to the power of love and sacrifice. Although Ethan is gone, his love for his mother never fades. Max, the special detective dog, is not just a companion, but a thread connecting two worlds, the world of the departed and the world of the living. Through Max's devoted protection, Sarah learns that love is not bound by time or space. It may change form, but its essence remains steadfast and eternal. The story also emphasizes that while life may present us with challenges that seem insurmountable, resilience, courage, and the support of those around us, whether human or animal, will help us find our way back. Max is not only a physical protector, but also a guide who leads Sarah back to trust in love and life, helping her realize that true love is an infinite source of strength that nothing can break. Ultimately, the story leaves behind a deeply human lesson. Love never dies. It only changes and finds its way back to us, providing us with the strength to face and overcome all pain, whether it's loss or danger. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.